Picture the moment the door slams. The argument is over. They have just said the most devastating, surgically precise thing they could think of to break your spirit. And now they are alone in the next room. The silence settles in. What is happening inside their head in that exact moment? Society has programmed you to believe a very specific, very dangerous lie about this moment. Pop psychology tells you that they are sitting there feeling absolutely nothing, that they are empty voids, devoid of all human emotion, experiencing the situation with the cold, calculated indifference of a machine. You picture them smiling, satisfied with the destruction they just caused. That is completely wrong. And believing that lie keeps you trapped in a loop of trying to understand them using the wrong behavioral baseline. If you were to put a heart rate monitor on them in that silence, if you were to track their pupil dilation, their galvanic skin response, and the rapid firing of their neurological pathways, you would not see the baseline of a stone-cold sociopath. You would see a system in absolute catastrophic overdrive. When a narcissist hurts you, they don't feel the guilt that you or I would feel. But they do feel something incredibly powerful. It is an emotion so intense, so volatile, and so deeply ingrained in their psychology that their entire personality has been artificially constructed just to avoid looking at it. They feel the agonizing threat of exposure. In the seconds after they cause you pain, their brain is not experiencing remorse. It is engaging in a massive, high-speed cover-up operation. They are frantically building a new version of reality where they are the victim and you are the aggressor. They have to, because if they don't, if they allow even one drop of actual accountability to seep into their consciousness, the fragile, godlike mask they wear will shatter, exposing the terrified, deeply flawed core they spend their entire lives running from. Understanding what happens in that room, in that silence, is the key to dismantling their power over you. If you don't understand the mechanics of their post-abuse processing, you will keep going back to them, expecting an apology that their brain is literally incapable of producing. You will keep trying to negotiate with a mask. Today, we are taking the mask off. We are going to put their behavior under a microscope and look at the raw, unfiltered truth of what happens in a narcissist's mind after they break your heart. I am going to show you the hidden mechanics of their shame, the exact reasons they blame you for their actions, and the subconscious tells that give them away. By the end of this, you won't just understand them, you will be immune to them. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you the exact behavioral map of a narcissist's mind in the aftermath of destruction. I'm going to show you the mechanisms they use to rewrite history in real time. But I need to warn you, what we are about to discuss is going to fundamentally change the way you view every argument you've ever had with them. If you click away now, you are going to walk into your next confrontation completely blind. You will fall back into the trap of looking for closure where none exists, and you will miss the one crucial behavioral indicator that proves they know exactly what they did. Do not skip ahead. What I am about to reveal in the next few minutes is the very information they are terrified you will figure out. Let's dive in. When a narcissist inflicts pain, the immediate aftermath is not a void. It is a highly active, heavily defended crime scene. To understand this, we have to look at the baseline of the narcissistic personality. Their entire existence is a performance designed to uphold a false self, a flawless, superior, untouchable avatar. When they hurt you, especially if they lose control to do it, that avatar cracks. The reality of their cruelty threatens to bleed through. So what do they feel? First, they feel cognitive dissonance. This is the psychological friction that occurs when reality doesn't match their delusion. Reality says, "You just acted like a monster." Their delusion says, I am perfect and justified. The brain cannot hold both of these truths at once. To resolve this friction, they don't apologize. They initiate the rationalization engine. They look at your reaction, your tears, your anger, your raised voice, and they weaponize it. They use your completely normal human reaction to their abuse as retroactive justification for the abuse itself. They tell themselves, look at how crazy they are acting. Look at how emotional they are. This is exactly why I had to say those things. They feel an overwhelming need to stabilize their environment. And they do this by projecting their internal chaos onto you. They aren't feeling remorse. They are feeling the urgent tactical need to make you the problem. But here is the secret they will never admit. They feel profound, paralyzing shame. Not guilt. Guilt is feeling bad for what you did to someone else. Shame is feeling bad about who you are. Deep down, beneath the grandiosity, the narcissist operates from a place of intense inadequacy. When they hurt you, a mirror is briefly held up to their face. For a fraction of a second, they see the monster. You can actually see this happen if you know what to look for. Watch for the behavioral leakage. In the middle of their rage, or right after they deliver the final blow, look at their micro-expressions. You will often see a fleeting flash of fear or disgust, quickly covered up by a smirk or a blank, dead stare. That is the mask slipping. That is the moment they feel the shame, panic, and immediately suppress it with arrogance. They will never admit this to you because admitting fault requires vulnerability. For a narcissist, vulnerability is a death sentence. It requires them to deconstruct the false self, and they simply do not have the psychological infrastructure to survive that collapse. To admit they hurt you is to admit they are flawed, and if they are flawed, they are worthless. That is their binary code. So where does this leave you? It leaves you with the ultimate leverage, the truth. Once you realize that their refusal to apologize isn't a sign of their strength, but a symptom of their psychological fragility, the game changes. You stop waiting for the apology. You stop trying to force them to see your pain. You cannot extract blood from a stone, and you cannot extract empathy from a survival mechanism. When they walk away after hurting you, they aren't walking away victorious. They are fleeing a crime scene they don't have the courage to clean up. They are trapped in a prison of their own design, forced to constantly rewrite reality just to survive the day. You, on the other hand, have the ability to live in reality. You have the ability to heal, to adapt, and to walk away. You don't need their admission of guilt to validate your reality. The moment you stop seeking their confession is the moment you take all your power back. Stay grounded, observe their behavior, and never forget that the mask is always hiding a terrified reality. There is a pervasive and incredibly damaging misconception that circulates through modern psychology, support groups, and mainstream conversation. It is the idea that when a person with severe narcissistic traits inflicts emotional, psychological, or even physical pain, they sit in the aftermath experiencing absolutely nothing. We are taught to view them as emotional black holes, dead inside, operating with the cold, reptilian detachment of a movie villain. You imagine them staring blankly at the wall, completely devoid of human feeling, essentially registering your devastation with the same internal reaction one might have while watching paint dry. This is what I call the myth of the void, and believing it is the single biggest tactical error you can make when dealing with these personalities. When you assume there is nothing inside, you stop looking for the behavioral mechanisms that are actually driving the machine. You give up your leverage because you think you are fighting a ghost, but you are not dealing with an absence of emotion. You are dealing with a hijacked emotional processing center. To understand what is actually happening in their neurological and psychological systems after they hurt you, we have to strip away the concept of empathy and replace it entirely with the concept of self-preservation. When they launch an attack and cause you pain, their limbic system does not shut down, it does not go quiet. It lights up like a power grid on the verge of a catastrophic surge. The emotion they are experiencing is profound, overwhelming, and highly volatile, but it is fundamentally self-directed. They are not feeling your pain. They are not feeling guilt, which is a pro-social emotion that requires the ability to step into someone else's shoes and recognize that a boundary was crossed. Instead, what they feel is a violent internal shockwave of threat response. In the immediate aftermath of hurting you, especially if the conflict has escalated to the point where they have lost control of their carefully curated mask, they are experiencing the terrifying sensation of psychological exposure. Every narcissistic personality is built upon a fragile, heavily guarded foundation of a false self. This false self is an idealized, impenetrable avatar designed to hide a core that is absolutely saturated with toxic shame and inadequacy. When they lash out and hurt you, they are inevitably behaving in a way that contradicts their own delusion of being a flawless, superior, and perfectly rational human being. Your visible pain, your tears, or your anger serve as an unavoidable, high-definition mirror reflecting the absolute ugliness of their actions back at them. That reflection is the ultimate threat to their survival. Therefore, the emotion they feel is not a void, it is panic. It is an intense, visceral fear of that false self collapsing. Their brain immediately registers your reaction not as a cue to offer comfort, but as a hostile stimulus that must be neutralized to ensure their psychological survival. The adrenaline spikes, the defense mechanisms lock into place, and their cognitive processing shifts entirely to aggressive damage control. They are feeling the desperate, frantic energy of an animal backed into a corner, completely consumed by the need to reconstruct their reality before the shame can breach their defenses. They do not feel empty, they feel a terrifying internal chaos, and every subsequent action they take is a desperate, calculated attempt to externalize that chaos entirely onto you, so they do not have to process the crushing weight of it themselves. The first 60 seconds after a narcissistic injury, the moment immediately following their abusive outburst, is the most critical window of behavioral observation you will ever get. If you are watching closely, you are not witnessing someone sitting in quiet reflection. You are observing a neurological crisis unfolding in real time. In behavioral analysis, we look for the baseline and we look for deviations. When they strike out, their baseline of control is shattered. What happens next is a rapid, high-stakes process of immediate recalibration. To understand this, you have to realize that a narcissist's perception of reality is not fixed. When the cognitive dissonance hits, when the reality of their vicious behavior threatens to expose their deeply flawed core, their brain cannot tolerate the objective facts of the room. The facts are dangerous. So, the brain immediately begins to alter the environment. Think of their memory of the event not as a high-definition photograph, but as something highly malleable. In those first 60 seconds, the hard, objective boundaries of what just happened begin to dissolve into loose ink lines. The exact words they said, the volume of their voice, the cruelty of their intent, all of it begins to bleed and blur like a watercolor wash across their consciousness. They are actively washing away the sharp edges of their own accountability. If their reality were a canvas, they are instantly repainting the scene, replacing the stark, exposing glare of their actions with a muted, warm, mud-earth palette of self-soothing justifications, dimming the severity of what they just did. The facts of the abuse are submerged, covered over until the scene is rendered unrecognizable to anyone who actually lived it. This recalibration is a survival mechanism, and it operates at a terrifying speed. Within 1 minute, their internal narrative shifts from the reality of their aggression to a completely fabricated story of their own victimization. You can almost see the psychological gears grinding as they search for the anchor point of their new reality. They scan your face, your posture, and your reaction, not for empathy, but for raw material to construct their defense. If you are crying, your tears become the proof that you are unstable, which retroactively justifies their outburst. If you are silent, your silence becomes a deliberate, malicious provocation. Their brain is frantically rearranging the sequence of events, desperately swapping the timeline. Cause and effect are completely inverted. They did not yell at you because they are abusive. They yelled because you forced them to, because your inherent flaws left them with absolutely no other choice but to strike. This is not a conscious, sinister plot hatched over days. It is an automatic defensive reflex designed to keep the false self intact. The psychological architecture of a narcissist requires them to be the hero or the absolute victim, but never the villain. So, when the villainous behavior is undeniably present in the physical space between you, the brain simply deletes the context and rewrites the script. It is an extraordinary, almost terrifying feat of self-deception that happens while you are still processing the initial blow. As you are standing there, still vibrating from the shock of their attack, they have already traveled light years away from the objective truth of the room. They have built an entirely new psychological structure in those 60 seconds, walling themselves off from the devastating shame of their own actions and burying the objective reality beneath a rapidly solidifying layer of distorted perception that they will defend to the death. We are now moving into the physical reality of the conflict, the undeniable biological evidence that proves they are not the cold, unfeeling statues they pretend to be. No matter how practiced their manipulation is, they are still bound by the limitations of the human nervous system. When that intense internal shame we discussed threatens to breach their psychological armor, it doesn't just stay in their head, it bleeds into their physiology. In behavioral analysis, we call this leakage. It is the momentary, involuntary escape of true emotion that bypasses their conscious control before they have the chance to slap the mask back on. You have to understand that the human face is governed by complex cranial nerves that are intimately tied to the limbic system. When a person experiences a sudden, violent spike of psychological threat, like the threat of seeing their own abusive nature reflected in your reaction, their autonomic nervous system reacts fractions of a second faster than their conscious mind can regulate it. If you know exactly what to look for, you can watch their entire false reality collapse and rebuild itself right across their face in less than half a second. For those who are highly attuned to the emotions of others, especially if you operate with a deeply empathetic personality structure, you are naturally wired to scan the people around you for signs of distress. Your instinct is to locate pain so you can soothe it, to find the humanity in the person standing across from you. But this is exactly where the behavioral leakage of a narcissist gets weaponized against you. When they deliver a devastating blow and that split-second flash of internal shame hits them, you will see a micro-expression of genuine agony, fear, or vulnerability ripple across their features. Because you are empathetic, you immediately misinterpret this biological glitch as remorse. You think you are seeing their conscience stepping forward to take accountability. You are not. You are witnessing the sheer terror of their false self cracking under the weight of their own actions. It is absolutely vital that you stop reading their physical cues through the lens of your own empathy and start reading them through the clinical lens of threat assessment. If you want to decode the truth of what they feel, you have to break their physical reactions down systematically. Watch their eyes. In the immediate aftermath of their cruelty, right before the anger or the manufactured victimhood sets in, you will often see a drastically accelerated blink rate. This is not an emotional response. It is a neurological tell indicating a massive spike in cognitive load as their brain frantically scrambles to rewrite the narrative. You might observe a sudden, rigid stilling of their entire body, the classic freeze response of a predator that suddenly realizes it has stepped into the light and is entirely exposed. Pay close attention to the lower half of the face and the neck. You will frequently see the platysma muscle, which runs from the jaw down the front of the throat, suddenly engage and tighten. This is a universal, involuntary physiological marker of intense fear, dread, or disgust. In this context, it is the disgust they feel toward their own exposed, inadequate core, which they are desperately trying to project outward onto you. And then, almost instantaneously, you will see the cover-up execute its protocol. The raw fear is far too painful for their fragile ego to sustain, so the brain violently shifts gears to protect itself. That fleeting micro-expression of terror is swallowed and immediately replaced by a recognizable defense posture. It might be an asymmetrical smirk, a deadened, shark-like stare, or a sudden, explosive display of manufactured, theatrical rage. That smirk is not genuine amusement. It is a recognized behavioral tell called duping delight, a physical manifestation of the arrogant relief they feel once they believe they have successfully pushed the shame back down, regained the upper hand, and successfully manipulated the dynamic back into their control. If you train yourself to observe these micro-movements, freezing the interaction in your mind and breaking their physical reaction down frame by clinical frame, you will realize that their body is constantly, involuntarily confessing to the exact reality that their words are aggressively denying. Once the immediate neurological threat of the first 60 seconds passes, the narcissist's brain must solidify the new reality it just invented. This requires an operational framework, a machine designed to continuously convert their toxicity into your liability. Enter the Rationalization Engine. This is not a passive mental state. It is an active, aggressive psychological processor that feeds entirely on your emotional output. When they strike you, they are acutely aware on a subconscious level that a transgression has occurred. But because their ego architecture prohibits accountability, the psychological ledger must be balanced by externalizing the blame. They cannot be the perpetrator, which leaves a mandatory vacancy for that role. You are standing right there, bleeding emotionally from the hit, which makes you the most convenient candidate to fill it. This is where your natural human response becomes the very ammunition used to execute your character assassination. When you are hit emotionally, you react. Your voice elevates, your speech pattern becomes erratic, your breathing accelerates, and tears may surface. To a healthy human being, these are universal biological indicators of distress. To the narcissistic brain, these are data points of instability. The rationalization engine takes your real-time distress, feeds it into their distorted cognitive matrix, and spits out a retroactive justification for their initial attack. They watch you lose your composure and tell themselves, with chilling conviction, that your current emotional dysregulation is the exact reason they had to discipline, insult, or demean you in the first place. They completely invert the timeline of cause and effect. Your reaction to their abuse is seamlessly categorized as the catalyst for it. This mechanism is incredibly efficient because it creates a closed-loop system of perpetual victimization for the narcissist. The more they hurt you, the more dysregulated you become. The more dysregulated you become, the more evidence they have that you are irrational, hysterical, or out of control. They will literally stand in the wreckage of the psychological bomb they just detonated, look at you covered in the debris, and calmly ask why you are making such a mess. They adopt a clinical, almost sterilized tone of superiority. This sudden shift in baseline, from aggressive attacker to calm, detached observer, is designed to highlight the contrast between their manufactured composure and your genuine distress. It is a calculated behavioral contrast tactic. By remaining entirely static while you are spinning out of control, they manufacture a visual and auditory illusion that validates their rewritten narrative. For individuals who are naturally inclined towards self-reflection, this tactic is devastatingly effective. When the narcissist confidently points to your reaction as the source of the conflict, your own introspection is weaponized against you. You begin to analyze your tone, your words, and your emotional state, searching for the flaw they are accusing you of having. You enter their funhouse mirror of reality, analyzing your defense rather than their attack. The rationalization engine has successfully diverted all investigative energy away from the original crime and focused it entirely on the way you reported it. You are no longer arguing about the fact that they betrayed or insulted you. You are now desperately defending the pitch of your voice and the validity of your tears, while they sit back, completely absolved of the initiating strike, watching their psychological machine do exactly what it was programmed to do. They have successfully forced you to put yourself on trial for the crime of being injured. Every ounce of your cognitive energy is now drained into proving your sanity to an entity that requires your perceived insanity to survive. They do not care about the facts of what initiated the argument, because the rationalization engine operates strictly on the fuel of your current distress, consuming your defensive explanations and converting them into further proof of their inherent superiority and your inherent defectiveness. We arrive at the terminal point of their psychological architecture, the absolute bedrock reason why you will never, under any circumstances, receive a genuine admission of fault. To understand this refusal, you must stop looking at accountability as a social grace or a moral obligation. In the behavioral ecosystem of a narcissist, accountability is not a concept of fairness, it is a weapon of mass psychological destruction. It operates as an inescapable high-fidelity mirror, reflecting the exact image they have spent their entire covert existence attempting to obliterate. For a neurotypical individual, admitting a mistake is uncomfortable but manageable. It is a temporary state of guilt that allows for correction, relational repair, and personal growth. But for this specific personality structure, a mistake is never just an action they performed. It is perceived as a permanent, fatal diagnosis of who they are at their core. You have to visualize their psyche as a structurally compromised fortress, holding back an absolute ocean of toxic shame and suppressed inferiority. The false self, that grandiose, flawless, unassailable mask they present to the world, is the only retaining wall keeping that ocean from completely drowning their consciousness. When you ask for an apology, when you demand that they take objective responsibility for hurting you, you are not simply asking them to own up to a temporary lapse in judgment. You are demanding that they take a sledgehammer to their own load-bearing wall. If they admit fault, they inherently admit a flaw. Because their cognitive processing operates in an inflexible binary system of absolute perfection or absolute worthlessness, admitting a single flaw means the entire construct of the false self must be a lie. The moment that false self collapses, they are violently forced to stare into the psychological mirror, and what looks back at them is a terrified, profoundly inadequate, and fundamentally unlovable core. This is not a dramatic metaphor. The level of psychic pain this exposure induces is neurologically paralyzing. It represents the total annihilation of their manufactured identity. Therefore, their refusal to apologize is treated by their brain as a matter of literal survival.